For those of you signing on, we're going to start in 1 minute. Okay, good morning and welcome to Topics in Lead Service Line Replacement Implementation. This is a joint webinar brought to you today by New Jersey Water and Jersey Water Works and the Lead Service Line Implementation Group. The Lead Service Line Implementation Group of Jersey Water Works is a group of career professionals and Jersey Water Works policy experts that work together over the last 6 months to evaluate best practices and develop tools to assist utilities with the requirements of the new lead service line replacement rule. Next slide, please. Today's webinar will be moderated by myself and Michael Fury, President of Agri-Environmental and Laboratory Services. I'll be handling the first half of the webinar through the break, and then Mr. Fury will take over in the second half. Next slide, please. Now, Paul from New Jersey Water is going to go over the requirements for the training contact hours for all attendees. Paul?
Thank you, Rich. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for attending today's session, and we appreciate the opportunity to collaborate with Jersey Water Works on an important topic on lead service line. For those of you that are attending today's class, each participant that wants to receive credit needs to be on his or her individual device. One person per registration per device. There's going to be 2 unique verification codes that are going to be issued during the training today. Please write those codes down because you'll need them later for when we send our credit certification form. That credit certification form will be sent to the email address that you used to register for today's session. If there's any questions, you should receive that form by the end of today, at the latest close of business tomorrow. If you have any questions, you can email a webinar@njwater.org. Thanks, Rich.
Thank you, Paul. Next slide, please. So I'll do a quick overview of the agenda for today, and then we're going to get right into it. First up, we're going to have Deandra from Jersey Water Works. She's going to go over a quick overview of the law and reporting requirements, and also review some of the work group resources that were created over the last 6 months by our group. Then we're going to have Elena from New Jersey DP go over the guidance coming from the lead service line replacement rule. And then we're going to allow some time, about 8 minutes or so, for some Q&A up front, and then a quick break. And then Mike Fury is going to take it over and introduce our key expert speakers who are going to review such things as inventory, creating a program, and other strategies and best practices for lead service line replacements. That session of 4 speakers is also going to be followed by a Q&A session. And then we're going to lead into our main speaker of the day, David Zimmer, who's the executive director of the New Jersey iBank. And we're going to follow that with a full roundtable of Q&A that'll be moderated by Gary Brune of Jersey Water Works, and then we'll close the session. So if I can move forward to the next slide, please. So our first section is going to be covered by Deandra. Deandra is a policy manager in Jersey Future. She was a member of our working group and helped lead us through this journey to today. Her and Gary Brune were instrumental in getting us to where we are. And she's going to start with an overview of the law and the requirements. Deandra, please.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for being here. My presentation is going to be very short. I'm not the expert here, but I did want to take a moment to highlight a few useful resources up front, and I will post the link to everything I cover in the chat shortly after. As you all know, on May 17th, there was a presentation regarding the deadlines for the lead service line replacement law. And there is a table that details all the deadlines and links to the supporting documents and reporting requirements. I wanted to highlight this table because it is a useful document, and I'll share the link to the document below for anyone who doesn't have it access or have it handy. And so a month from today, very timely, you will be required to submit your updated inventory, and annually July 10th each year after. You'll also be required on the 22nd to have your progress report, and annually July 10th after. Your lead service line replacement plan, initial plan, July 22nd, and your annual plan updated will be on the 31st each year after. And your notice requirements, initial September 1st, 22nd, and your annual August 20th each year after. We'll post the link to that in the chat immediately after, but this is a one-stop shop resource that will help you as you go along this process. Next slide, please. As Rich Calby mentioned, the implementation work group out of the Jersey Waterworks Lead and Drinking Water Task Force has been convening a group of experts that have come up with a few helpful resources that are meant to educate and help you in terms of coming up with your own documents. And I just wanted to highlight 4 which have been posted, and I'll post a link to these as well in the chat. The first of these is a resource document on alternative procurement options for lead service line replacement. Andrea, you can go ahead and open that up. I won't spend too long on this document. However, we understand that different water systems have different sizes and different challenges. And this is an overview with resources and background information on how we can think innovatively about procuring services for lead service line replacement. We can go back to the next document. Again, these are all uploaded, and I'll post a link to each of these as soon as I get done here. I'll put it in the chat. We have a procurement toolkit that offers a draft RFQ scope. And this is something that we have had NJDEP looked at as well. We believe this is a document that will provide you with information in terms of where to begin, where to start, and to show you and help you think about everything that you would need to sort of get this process moving along. You can scroll down, Andrea. It takes the form of a template. And so this is something that is workable. The idea here is that you will take this and use it to guide your plan for procuring services. And we've also conveniently listed the deadlines in here as well for you. Next slide. Additionally, there are 2 other resources. There is a model ordinance and access to private property, and you'll hear Karima Deem speak a little bit more on that. This document was modeled after the one used in Newark in their successful replacement program. And so we've taken this and made it a more general document that you can use. Serves as a template. It is something that serves as a resource that you can consider in terms of moving forward, should you need to have something like this in place for your program. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, next resource. We also have a document on 5th liter sampling. It is a resource document for you to read at your leisure, but it does give you some background information, how to conduct the sampling, what it's meant to achieve. And we hope that these resources could serve as additional information, something you can turn to as you move through your replacement plan. I think that's it for my presentation. Next. We want to thank you for joining us. This is the first of the 2 codes that you will receive to receive your credits for today. And so this will be up for about 45 minutes. And please take the time to just copy your code if you are seeking training contact hours credits today. And Paul, did you want to?
Yeah, Deandra. So the first code is one of the two that we're going to have today for the 2-hour session. Everybody needs to remain online for those 2 hours. If there's anybody searching for PE credit, you can submit that to the PE board for credit and approval, but you will need these codes for us to be able to send that training certificate to you. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Deandra. I know we ran through everything quick and this is a quick webinar today, but please take the time to look at the resources that were put together by the work group. The goal of work group was to try to take this law and break it down and provide essentially a toolbox that utilities could use to comply. So definitely pay attention to the resources and find them at the website that has been set up. So next slide, please. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Elena from the Bureau of Water System Engineering, New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, will speak as a follow-up to the webinar that DEP did. I see there's about 150 or so attendees today, probably many were on that. We felt it was important to have DEP here today to kind of go over some of the questions and answers that were presented at that webinar and take the next step to help support the work that this group has done. So I'll leave it to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just gonna share my screen here. All right. Hopefully you guys can all see. Thanks for joining us today. Here we are again discussing the lead service line replacement law. Like Rich said, I've been on a couple of these things before, so I might be a familiar face and voice. So we can get started. So what we wanted to do is take some questions that we were getting from water systems repeatedly, just to kind of clarify them. And hopefully this will clarify some things for you guys. So the hot topic that everyone's wondering, what is an inlet? So the intent of the law is to have all of the portions of the lead service line removed. And in a lot of cases, and what we've heard confirmed from our water systems in our meetings and via emails, is that in a lot of cases, portions of the service line extend into the building. So what the department is recommending, based off of information that we've gathered from various water systems who've conducted lead service line replacements in the past, is that the replacement should include the lead service line material up to the first meter, the shutoff valve, or 3 feet of pipe within the home, whichever is sooner. This information that was provided from water systems who've done this in the past was consistent across the board. So that's why we're choosing to recommend this method here. So just a couple of questions that we get on identifying materials. Do all service lines need to be identified? And the answer is yes. All service lines, whether they're copper, PVC, lead, what have you, need to be identified and documented on the inventory spreadsheet provided by the department. We have actually recently updated that inventory spreadsheet to include a column for customer side service line verification. There's an existing verification column for the system owned side. So we wanted both of those included on there. That's available on our website and on the What's New portion of our main page on the water supply site. And then when do all lines need to be identified? All lines must be identified by July 22nd, 2031, and lead service lines, which include galvanized lines, must be replaced by that date as well. So just a few points on reporting. As Deandra pointed out, that chart that we have is available in our guidance document that is also posted on our website. That's an easier way to have everything displayed in front of you. But for this year, July 22nd, 2022, water systems must submit an updated lead service line inventory to us. The lead service line replacement progress report, which details your progress in any replacements that were done in the past year, and a lead service line replacement plan. We have a template available for that, and that is available on our website as well. You can find that again on the main page on the right-hand side of the screen. There's a What's New tab. You can get all of that, those forms and documents and templates there. It's also on our sampling and regulatory forms page. Another date to be aware of is September 1st, 2022. Water systems are required to submit the notice of lead service line to consumers form. This documents that notice was provided in accordance with the statute to those who are served by a lead service line. There's our website on the bottom there. You can find, again, all of the forms and instructions are found there. And if you have any questions, you can submit them to the water supply box. So some questions on compliance that we've received. How will these rates be calculated for compliance? So per the statute, water systems need to be replacing on a 10% annual average rate. So we are going to recommend, and this is a recommendation included in our guidance. There's some more details on there if you want to take a look at that. We're recommending that to ensure that all of these lead service lines are replaced by that 10-year period, you can assume that all unknown service lines are lead and base the replacement rate off of that for that number. So if you have 10 known lead service lines and 90 unknown service lines, you should be replacing and identifying at least 10 per year, which would get you to that 10% rate. This is a recommendation. There seemed to be some confusion on that in the last webinar. So I just want to make it clear that this is not a requirement. It's just something that we're recommending as a best practice, which will hopefully help your programs out. What if you don't start replacing until after 2022? We understand that water systems need some time to kick up these programs, and that's totally fine. You will just have to increase your rate of replacement in subsequent years to ensure you meet that deadline by 2031. More word on that is in the guidance as well, if you'd like to take a look at that. Okay, we've gotten some questions about extensions. In the statute, it is written that water systems can request an extension for the deadline, which is July of 2031. We're drafting a form currently for water systems to fill out if they believe they qualify for an extension. In the statute, it says that you must demonstrate that an extension is needed to meet a service reliability demand or public health need, which is not related to lead, within the system per the law. At this time, we will not be reviewing extension requests for this year. I think we just think it's a little too early to tell if you're not going to be able to meet the deadline or not. We're asking that water systems make every effort possible to meet that 10-year deadline. And when we make those extension forms available, we'll send out an email blast, of course, and we can even have some further discussions on that if systems want more information on that. Okay, lead service line replacement. This is another question that we get a lot. Sorry if you guys can't see the top portion of that question. I'm not sure if this is blocking it. But if a water system owns one side of the line and a property owner owns the other side of the line, who's responsible for replacing the service line? This seems to be a common question we're getting from water systems. The ownership is usually split. However, the statute puts the responsibility on the public community water system to ensure all lines are fully replaced. So regardless of who owns the service line, even if the property owner owns from the main all the way to the inlet, the water system is responsible for replacement and creating a plan to do so. You're not responsible for funding the private portion of the line, except in certain circumstances, which I'll go over. It's only if you receive principal forgiveness. But you are responsible for ensuring that replacements occur. So that involves creating a plan to do so, coordinating with property owners. All of that business is the responsibility of the public community water system. Now, we do understand that's easier said than done. There are instances where a customer is going to refuse to have their service line replaced. So what we're recommending is that water systems ask at least once annually after initially requesting to gain access to the private side for replacement. If you're customer or property owner continues to refuse, this should be documented on the customer refusal form, which will be available on our website shortly. There's a spreadsheet that you can fill out, which will document the address, how many times you've asked, if they've given you a reason, those kinds of things. It's just important to document that. We also have a form for the customer or property owner themselves to fill out. Sometimes, if they're not going to be willing to have their service line replaced, they might not even want to fill out a form. But that is an option and could be something useful for water systems to have further down the road for just accounting for the fact that these property owners do not want their service lines replaced. Again, these will be available on our website shortly once they have been uploaded and approved. Okay. Okay, some funding questions that we've gotten. If a water system has corrosion control treatment, are they less likely to receive principal forgiveness funds? And the answer is no. Priority funding for principal forgiveness is given to water systems with an active action level exceedance or who meet affordability criteria. We have some information on affordability criteria on our environmental justice website. So you can find out if your water system is in an area that meets those conditions. But the presence of corrosion control treatment doesn't necessarily mean a water system will not get principal forgiveness. It's more dependent on meeting those requirements. And if your system does not meet those requirements and we happen to have principal forgiveness funds left over, we'll allocate them as available per points given to water systems for each project. And another question, can state revolving funds be used to replace private side lead service lines? So water systems, and this is written into our intended use plan, water systems receiving principal forgiveness funds for lead service line replacement must utilize those funds to address the cost share of the property owner's side as applicable. So if you're receiving principal forgiveness from a DWSRF loan, you should be using that to address the property owner side, so the cost burden is not on them. And the idea behind that is if you're receiving principal forgiveness, probably you're meeting some sort of affordability criteria and your water system is in an area where people may have trouble paying for that. So we're trying to address that through that. And these are just some resources. This is our main page up here with the water supply website. You'll see on the right-hand side of the screen when you go on the water supply website, this what's new portion of it. Right under the third-party designation, you'll see all this lead service line law resources. We also have resources from previous webinars linked below as well. We did a webinar on the annual notice requirements. So if you have any questions about that, you can take a look at the information we've provided on that as well. As I said before, we have our template lead service line replacement plan available for use. The department is strongly recommending that you submit your plans on that. You can have another plan separately in-house, but for our purposes, that's what we're requesting. Guidance is available on there. And as I mentioned, we have an updated lead service line inventory form with 2 new fields. So if you have not already submitted your inventory form, we're asking that you submit it on that updated form, which is again on our website in the what's new portion and on the sampling and regulatory forms page. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Elena. Great
No problem.
information. In addition to the DEP resources, we've also posted the link in the chat to the Jersey Waterworks resource page. You can find that at Jersey Waterworks, the website, and just go to the resource page. Now we would like to open up the question and answer session. Please post any questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. I'll start with the first question. I think this is for DEP, a question that gets asked a lot in regards to inventories. Do lead service line inventories have to include such things as fire service line and other miscellaneous connections? Or are they strictly the lines that service a home or business?
So we have this written in our FAQs, but it's for potable lines only. So at this time, we're not requiring fire service lines or irrigation lines to be included in that. So just your potable service lines. However, it's important to note that the service lines, even if they're serving a vacant home, they should be accounted for as well, or a vacant business.
Great, thank you. A second question, could you tell us again what needs to be submitted in September, on September 1st of this year?
Sure. Water systems have to submit the notice of lead service line to, I'm getting my words jumbled, the notice of lead service line consumers form, which is confirming that you sent your notice of lead service line materials letter to those who are served by a lead service line. In our guidance, there's a whole chart on, I think, page 13 towards the end, and it outlines everything that needs to be submitted and the links to those forms as well. So I would recommend taking a look at that. I could put the link in the chat to our main page where you can get the guidance if it's not already in there.
Right, thank you. And please put the questions in the Q&A function, not in the chat. Thank you. So another question, they seem to all be coming in for DP at this moment. Is there any guidance forthcoming on how predictive modeling is to be used in generating an inventory?
Yes, we're finalizing that. I don't have a date, unfortunately, when it will be available, but we're aware of that and we're working on it, hopefully in the final stages.
Great, thank you. And do brass lines equal lead?
I'm not as familiar with brass lines. There may be some lead content in there, but as far as the law describes, the law says anything that is solidly made of lead, has lead appurtenances or goosenecks or galvanized lines. I don't believe it says anything about brass lines or brass fittings.
Great. In terms of unknowns, is there any guidance currently on how to check for unknown service lines?
Yes, in the guidance, we have some information on how you can, look back at old records and other helpful resources that you can use. Predictive modeling might be something to look into as well. Like I said, hopefully we'll have our guidance out available on that soon. But there are some methods that you can use.
Right. And Deandra, I guess question for you, will this presentation be made available for the attendees today?
Yes, we will have the combined slides from all presenters available. In addition to any questions we don't get to today, we will send information out with those answers as well. So you can expect that by end of week.
Great, thank you. I think we have a few more minutes. There's a couple of questions left in the queue here. I think a couple of these we may know the answers to already. If your order has a no detect of lead, do you still need to replace galvanized service lines? And I believe the answer to that is yes.
Yes, that's correct.
Why are galvanized lines considered equal to lead lines?
I believe the reason is that galvanized lines have the ability, if they were downstream from a lead service line, to absorb lead and leach it out at a later time, which can increase levels of lead in drinking water. That's their reasoning for it, I believe. They didn't say anything specifically in the law about that, but that's what people are going with.
And a follow-up to the unknowns, is there a recognized tested method, or do you have to excavate the lines to determine the material type?
There, you can use multiple methods to determine service lines. You can use old tap cards. You can have people go into their basements and try to identify the service line on the property owner side. If you can't get any reliable information from any of those methods, excavation could be required. And it could be required in the future. But at this time, we're suggesting that you use all other methods, exhaust all other methods first before excavating.
And Deandra, another question for you, and I guess it's maybe for our work group. I know we explored this a little bit, but will lead line replacement rules supersede road opening moratoriums and permits? I know we were exploring that. I don't know if we've got an answer to that, but maybe some Gary might want to pick up on later, unless you have an answer.
Yeah, I would say at this point, we don't have an answer yet, but this is an example of one of the questions that we would address to the best of our capabilities when we push out the information. Like you mentioned, the work group has been trying to get answers and working with officials and experts who do this kind of work, but we haven't been able to have any concrete guidance on that. So this is something that we'll explore possibly in the next phase of the guidance that we put out from the work group.
Great.
I can say we've on the state level have discussed that with DOT. It doesn't seem like it would apply. I think there are waivers you can apply for when it comes to a road moratorium. It doesn't seem like this is something that would qualify for a waiver. But we have met with DOT and they've reviewed the portion of our guidance document where we talk about road moratoriums. So we just recommend when DOT reaches out to you to try to coordinate replacements around that, because as they open the road, they'll pay for it. So that's something that can be a cost-cutting measure for water systems if they happen to overlap in the areas where road replacements are happening.
Okay, we're just a couple more. We have 1 minute left. Elaine, there's a lot of questions coming in about the galvanized, and I know this has been answered many times. The law made it clear that a galvanized line is considered to be a lead line. But is there any guidance in terms if a galvanized line has a certain type of coating or protection that would exempt it from being in the inventory?
Not that I'm aware of. The statute doesn't make any exceptions for anything like that. And because unfortunately the statute doesn't, we're not allowed to permit those kinds of exceptions either. A galvanized line is a galvanized line according to the law that was passed. So unfortunately, those will have to be replaced.
I read, Rich, I'm gonna just jump in. I noticed somebody wrote, one of the questions is galvanized lines contain a zinc coating to prevent corrosion. This coating was also often contaminated with lead. Is another reason why it's considered the same as a lead line. And some galvanized lines, may contain, certain levels of lead, and that's one of the reasons why galvanized lines are considered lead lines.
All right, thank you, Mike. All right, last question. If you send certified letters to homeowners with lead service lines, do you need to send those notices certified every year?
I can't remember off of the top of my head, so I don't want to say either way, but I know that's written in the guidance. So if you go take a look at that, you can find the answer to that. Sorry for not knowing that off the top of my head.
Great. If there's any questions we didn't get to, we'll try to wrap them up in the next session or at the end in the roundtable. But thank you, everybody. Great questions, great answers. At this time, we'd like to take a quick 2-minute break. And then Mike Fury is going to bring us into our speakers. Thank you.
All right, everybody. We're gonna get started again. First, want to thank all the Elena for coming on and speaking from the DEP. Hopefully Elena can stay with us and to the end to do some follow-up questions and answers. I want to also thank the entire work group. We've been working very diligently for the last 6 months on all these resources, take advantage of all these resources. We also put together, I think, a great webinar, great speakers. These are the experts in the field, and we're gonna get right into it and start with the first speaker. And this is really the heart of today's webinar. We want to talk about the inventories and we want to talk about how to comply with the regulations and the law, and also put together a comprehensive plan, and also hear from Kareem Adim, who has successfully gone through the entire program with the city of Newark and lean on his expertise. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Matt Sheik, the Director of Water Quality and Environmental Compliance for New Jersey American. He's going to be speaking about lead service line replacement legislation and inventory consideration. So I'll turn it over right to Matt. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to do a time check, so I'm respectful to the folks who follow me. So I noticed in the chat, there were a lot of questions actually also pertaining to inventory, right? Tried to take a lot of what was in the legislation and break it down and make it a little bit simpler. I'll be sharing a little bit of, let's say, my or our approach to date. Some things that have worked, some things that have been maybe more of a struggle than we anticipated. I did include, where applicable, some of the actual citations. So I thought maybe that would be helpful for attendees to also be able to reference back in the legislation and see exactly what we're talking about. So again, you know, the nice thing, if there is one, right, about compliance here is we're all gearing up for EPA's revised lead and copper rule anyway, which really also points to inventory, completion of the inventory as, I'm going to say, one of the most important early steps that we can take as water systems. So again, to be very kind of detailed about the inventory requirements in the legislation, the first bullet, of course, it applies to all systems, right? And I know that there were some questions, and maybe we can get with DEP on that again. But regardless of our status, whether we have known lead, no known lead, et cetera, these inventory requirements apply to all of us, so everyone has to complete one. Of particular importance, really, as we get started, is the devil's in the details, right? Get into the definitions. The lead service line definition has been expanded to include galvanized lines. Certainly that was a hot topic in the Q&A already. And it's just something that we all kind of have to get our minds around. I'll touch back on that point in 1 second. For me, it's always been kind of helpful to share this hierarchy, right? So I do that internally with our GIS folks and other team members. Lead is greater than galvanized and gooseneck, which I clump together, but obviously there are times on the inventory forms where they are reportable separately. So it goes lead is the highest, followed by galvanized, followed by unknown, followed by known and not lead. That matters when we complete our inventory, because if we say a line is lead, it means one or both sides are lead. If we say it's galvanized, then that means there is no lead on either side, right? And we follow the hierarchy exactly down the tree, just like that, parcel by parcel. I did include some deadlines, and I know the kickoff slides actually included some more. So I really limited it to the inventory submissions to DEP, 2 of which have passed. So September 2021 was the initial count of lead service lines. January 22nd was full parcel by parcel inventory and characterization of each individual service in a water system's boundaries. And coming up, I know a lot of folks are very focused on getting lead service line replacement plans together and submitted to DEP, but we want to be very careful we don't forget that that deadline is also requires an updated inventory submitted to DEP. A reminder to everyone out there, the legislation requires that the most recent inventory submitted to the DEP is made publicly available on the website of the water system. There are some small system considerations there. If a system is below population 3,300 and does not have a website, it is acceptable to be posted in certain publicly available locations. Going down, I mean, Elena hit on it, the overarching point: by July 22nd, 2031, all service line materials must be known, and all of those that meet the legislative definition of a lead service line must have been replaced, with some carve-outs for extension under certain circumstances. Next slide, please. So this is really kind of an eye chart, and I'm not expecting anybody to read this, but for everyone who's kicking off or even in the early stages of completing an inventory assessment and getting that into DEP and getting that prepared, there are a lot of key considerations for water systems. We have to recognize first that this is a very transparent process. Making them publicly available is going to put it out there for the general public to consume. There's certainly an importance placed on accuracy. We put ourselves in the customer's shoes and can imagine the panic and fear that we cause when we tell someone that they have a lead service line and maybe they were never told that. The customer reacts, you know, the way the customer reacts. Does it undermine trust? It's possible, right? We have to do everything we can to provide the right guidance materials and help customers interpret this information and minimize risk and minimize that fear by giving them good information. And that's really about resources. It also matters how many resources we have on board. That's a consideration for all water systems. We may be approaching this with the resources we have internally, but certainly engaging contractors and consultants may be on the table to really getting this done or getting it done quickly. Communication is a key piece. It's actually, I would say, you know, needs to be a thought that is going on before the inventory is even available, but especially as we begin to populate these pieces of data and make them publicly available. Data governance is just, you know, a fancy term at times I hear thrown around. It really is about choosing, you know, identifying that one source of truth that we're all going to touch, that we're all going to update. This is going to be an ongoing process, right? It's not one and done. As we do that, we need to make sure that we don't pollute good data with bad. We need to make sure that our teams are pulling from the right database when they're doing reporting to the DEP or handing off jobs to contractors for lead service line replacement. One of the key features here that I'll point out, and this kind of touches on the communication and trust and the customer reaction. What you see on the screen is actually a snip from a map that we have on our website. And I'm not great with colors, but the bluish are not lead. Any blacks you see are lead on either the customer or company side, and those circles are halved to show that. But I want to call attention to the yellow, orange, or red. It's one of those colors. That was selected for customers with galvanized lines. Why did we select that? We selected that because going back year after year after year, those customers, and this touches on some of the comments in the chat, those customers were never told that they had a lead service line. Through a definition change in this legislation, they now have a lead service line as it's defined in the statute. So we thought it was important, and it's just something we may want to consider moving forward. It's important to be communicating with the customer that, no, you don't actually have lead as a material, but yes, you do have a lead line that will be subject to this legislation and that we will be replacing over time. So that's just kind of an example of peeling out that one customer perspective and making sure that we're communicating with that customer in a way that kind of maintains trust and minimizes fear. Next slide. I'm doing a time check. Okay, coming up on it. So how do we complete the inventory? Again, you know, there were some comments on this. I boiled it down to traditional methods and then some others. And then, you know, I saw Eric's question about, you know, and I'm interested in the same about predictive modeling, but we have some traditional methods. We have construction records, tap cards. We can obtain best we can the information from plumbing permits that have been taken out by customers. Of course, if we want to be sure in general, we're going to do a test pit, right? If there's conflicting information, or if we feel like it's just too out of date. But we've instituted some other methods, right? And I'm going to call it opportunistic, the opportunistic approach. When we're doing other routine work, when we're getting into homes, meter replacement, meter relocation to outside sets, when we're doing our main replacement projects, maybe we get a leak inspection work order cut. Those are opportunities for our boots on the ground out in the community to be our eyes and ears and bring the information back to us. It's really it underscores the importance of having that good data management too. And a consideration for all of us out there, right? Do our field operations teams have the tools to document what they're doing? Do they have the opportunity just because they see it? Do they come back and tell Joe or Jane in the office? It's, you know, there's no one answer for that. Much of that has worked for us. Do we allow contractors access to the same data systems that we're using to populate that one source of truth and bring that information back to one central location? These are things for us to consider as we, you know, hammer out our plans. Next slide, please. We're launching some other methods right now. What you didn't see on the back end of that map that was pictured is a public interface where customers can click on their own parcel, and using their iPhone or an iPad or something like that, they can actually take a picture of the service coming through the wall. Trust me, we get lots of pictures of gas service lines. We get lots of pictures of people's feet, but it does also allow customers to send us what they think they have and establish communication method through email with that customer. And then we can bring that back to our local teams of experts, validate it, and update our inventory. Or maybe it's conflicting information and it takes that tap card and says, yeah, that's out of date. Now maybe we need to go and do a test pit. Because that back end has worked pretty well, we're exploring opportunities to use postcards to our customers in certain pockets and make it manageable by limiting how much we're sending out at once and really direct customers to use that method. It's 2022. People tend to want to do things more automated in a more automated fashion. If we can start to model our program to incorporate some of that, certainly that's helpful. Collection of all this information certainly does help to build our baseline inventory, which actually makes predictive modeling that much better in the future. So the legislation is accepting on some level of predictive modeling. And again, Eric, I'll go back to your question. You know, what is the appropriate technological approach? How much predictive modeling can we do? How much do we prove out that model before we expand it to maybe a larger footprint? And then the last thing I'll close with is don't want to overlook the fact that the legislation specifically allows the department to require excavation. So certainly there are times that that may be the only way we get to the truth, the whole truth, and kind of nothing but the truth. But it is obviously a tool in the toolbox after some of these other approaches maybe yielded conflicting or questionable information. So lots said there in a very short amount of time, but again, want to be respectful to the folks following me. So I'll cap it there and be available, of course, during the Q&A.
Thanks a lot, Matt. I appreciate that. That's a great start to what we're talking about today. What we're going to do is we're going to move on to our next speaker, Mr. Kareem Adim. I've had the privilege to work with Kareem over the last couple of years on all these issues. The city of Newark has done a remarkable job in such a short period of time of removing all the lead service lines. And he is available today to speak to us and share his experience. And the other thing I wanted to mention is everybody on today's session is going to be available by email or phone if you have any follow-up questions, moving down and past this workshop. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Kareem Dean, the Director of Water, Department of Water and Sewer Utilities for the City of Newark. He's going to talk about the political will, the model ordinance, and community engagement. So it's all yours, Kareem.
Can we go back to the one slide? Oh, okay. Thank you for that, Mike. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. I just want to, first touch on, this great work that this state is going to require us to move lead service lines in 10 years. I think that's awesome. But I also want to just talk about, having the political will, especially for utilities. Political will plays a huge part in what we do every day. The political will is to having that great leadership, making those unpopular decisions at times, the decisions that can be a little unpopular, leadership. And when we think about that, accountability, responsibility, and ownership, those three words go hand in hand. But when we look at those three, right, great leaders project those qualities. In Newark, we had to have a great leader in the mayor and a great leader in our utility. Kareem and Dean and our executive team, we made some very unique and unpopular decisions. And a part of that was, next slide, coming into the model ordinance. Our model ordinance in September 2019 kind of accelerated and was a major game changer for us when we started our program. Given the city of Newark is 75% renters, we were able to come in and provide an ordinance where the renters can give us access to perform the work inside their homes. And they wouldn't be punished by the ownership or the city, and having that communication around that. So that ordinance allowed us to come in, we give a right of entry, right of access, where our contractors and the city could come in and do inspections and perform work. Trenton did a similar thing, having an ordinance around, a special tax assessment for the homeowners contribution. Passaic Valley in 2022 just did another model ordinance, right, that helped their program. And that ordinance was around, no direct costs, fines, and non-compliance. These are three great examples. City of Newark took one thing about not going with fines or a special assessment, right? And you got to see what fits your town and your town or your utility. We thought if somebody refused to give us right of entry, we'll bring them to court, within 60 days and have them show cause of why they didn't want us to come into the house to change the lead service line that we thought was very important with this program that was mandatory and free. Next slide. Community engagement and public outreach. I think community engagement, you cannot engage the community enough. We sent out one thing was sending out a bunch of literature and the things that we did in all different languages, having a robust amount of community meetings. Mike Fury was saying he did a lot of work. We even dragging him some time to some of the community meetings to answer questions. We found out earlier on that, we were going door to door, we would have these robust community meetings. We started bringing the contractors to the meetings too, so they can get the pulse of the community and see what's going on as we started, having a lead service line replacement program. But prior to having a lead service line replacement program, just explaining to the community why we needed to come in and do visual inspections, right? Doing material evaluations so we can, as we were building our lead service line inventory, just to verify some things so we can have a backlog of areas where a contractor can start at. So we really engaged in the community and we brought them into the program so they can first visualize it, but actually step inside the program and ensure that this work was going to be completed and start and partnering with us. Those partnerships played off. Later on, we had, thought about putting lawn signs. We'll put lawn signs out that said, similar. I had my lead service line replaced. I signed up for the program. We also had, communication in the city around billboards, social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, robust virtual teletown halls and community meetings. All this to keep the community engaged on the progress of where we were at, what we plan to do, and being able to pivot when needed. And we thought it was very important. DEP even started coming to attend some of our community engagement programs, right? You know, making sure the community had the buy-in to do what we needed to do. Radio ads or the TV ads, all the communication kind of paid off because everyone in the city was very aware of the program that we were implementing, and the need for us to do it and why we needed to act fast and get it done. So again, that takes, you know, the political courage or the political will. It takes great leadership, and it takes the communication of really for the utility side. Sometimes we get looked at in a bad way that we don't communicate, but it's never enough communication when you really looking to do a robust program like a lead service line replacement, and knowing that we just sent out a couple of 100,000 notices to residents that they potentially may have a lead service line. You know, the community meetings and community engagement will give them a better opportunity to understand why we're doing this and what's the real need. Thank you. Next slide. That was the last slide. Yep, those are some of the lawn signs we did on the next slide that we put out in the community, having residents sign up. And one thing I can tell you, Mike, and I'm gonna switch it back to Mike, once the residents really embrace your program and understand what you're doing, you know, it makes a successful program moving forward. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks a lot, Kareem. I appreciate that. I just wanted to mention too, and I know Kareem's a very humble person, but Kareem was recognized by the National AWWA for a program that's really going to become a model for the entire country. So hats off to Kareem. He's an excellent resource. Don't be shy to reach out to him. He'll answer all your questions. He'll get back to you. Thanks a lot, Kareem, for joining us today. Okay, next up, we want to turn it over to really the program planning, which is the meat of this whole program. I want to introduce you to Sandy Kutzing, professional engineer, vice president for CDM Smith, New Jersey, and she's going to go into details about lead service line replacement program planning. And I'll turn it over to Sandy. Go right ahead, Sandy.
Great, thank you, Mike. So today we're going to focus on a couple of tips and tricks on filling out the plan. So a couple of decisions that you may be trying to make ahead of the July submittal. So a couple of goals when you're looking at replacement program planning. So obviously completing that form and getting that to DEP by the July 22nd date, and then using that as your framework to develop a program that's implementable. And then you want to start meeting with public officials to discuss some of the logistics, and also start thinking about how you're going to set up your data management. There's a lot of stuff here for tracking replacements, tracking filters, post-replacement sampling, and it's going to be really difficult to do with spreadsheets. So, you know, if you have a few hundred or 1,000 service lines, so start thinking about how you're going to, you know, what's going to be your plan for keeping track of all that data. And then also setting up some SOPs for recording the data, keeping your inventory up to date, and replacements and disturbances. Next slide. So there's a number of things that are in the form, and I think the ones that are in bold here are the ones that have really the meat of it and a couple of decisions to make. So if you go click again, there's an animation. So I'm going to focus on two things right now in the interest of time. Private side funding options, that's a decision you may want to try, try to make before July. There's some sections in it in the report. And then also how to go about prioritizing and establishing a plan. Next slide. Okay, so there's 4 different things really like general buckets for private side funding. So number one is offering no assistance. I'm going to go from least assistance to most assistance. So no assistance to the homeowners. This is allowed by law. You do not have to pay for the private side. But as Elena said, you won't be eligible for any of the grants, the principal forgiveness. You're going to receive a low score. Also is going to drive down participation, and then it's going to result in partial replacements during emergencies. You can also do a subsidized loan like Philly does. Philly does a no interest loan for the full cost. They do it as a lien against the property and it's paid back over 60 months. Next slide. Another option is to provide some partial grants. So not to charge the whole cost, to charge a percentage of the cost or a flat fee. So for example, Trenton's current program, the last few years it was $1,000 and it was paid back over 5 years. Now they're moving to a free and mandatory program because they have realized, no amount of public education is going to get every single replacement done when you're charging a fee. So they are moving to a free and mandatory program. Cincinnati currently offers a 40% discount up to a total, they'll contribute $1,500 per service line. And then there's the option of full grant where the utility is fully paying for it either with external funding from grants or a rate increase, which is allowed in New Jersey as of last July. So that is Newark, PVWC is doing that, New Jersey American Water. So Newark and PVWC, it's free and it's mandatory. New Jersey American Water is free and voluntary. Pittsburgh has a similar program, no cost and voluntary. They have been tracking their replacement rates and they get about an 85% participation rate, which is, even when it's free, if it's voluntary, that's probably a realistic goal. And that's with a very strong public education campaign. Detroit is another option. They do no cost to homeowner when they're doing a water main replacement because they're already on the street. If a customer wants it done outside of that, then they have to pay a portion of it. Okay, next slide. So those are just some examples. There's no one way to do this. There's lots of different options. So what's going to work best for your utility and community? Okay, so moving on to prioritization planning. So we're going to look at, there's a couple of things you want to start with, what we'd recommend. And DEP kind of lays this out in their plan. So first you have to decide on the factors. What are you going to use for your prioritization? Then you want to weight your factors by importance. Evaluate the total score. You could do that by property, by block, by census block, by census tract. And then that doesn't necessarily mean like, okay, there's a home over here, so you're going to go to this home first, then there's a home on the other side of the town, you're going to go to that home. But it just gives you that density of overlapping priorities, and it may help you guide your program. So then, and the last thing I want to just say, it is perfectly okay to state what you know now, what you're going to plan. Maybe you only know what you're going to do next year. State it, and then note how you're going to determine the rest of the years, even if it's not exactly clear at this point. So next slide. So I have an example here. Oh, well, first, here are some of the example factors. These are in the DEP plan. I think there's a few others, but I divided these into information you get from the census and GIS data. So there's lots of great information available for free on the census where you can pull layers into your GIS. Now, I will say, I don't know how you would do this without GIS, to be honest. This would be a very, very challenging spreadsheet or some sort of database management system. GIS and doing it visually is really the best way to do this. So you're looking at some census data. You can get the overburdened communities off the DEP site and the climate, environment, and economic justice areas. There's also information about children 5 and under or 18 and under. And then getting the childcare locations of childcare facilities. That actually might be from your utility information. Depends on which community. And then from your utility, you're looking at, the density of lead service lines. You're going to get that from your inventory, where you're looking at planning water main replacements, where you might be doing meter replacements, road resurfacing, Maybe you're looking at lead levels from water quality sampling, previous partial replacements, water quality complaints, high pressure areas. So water main condition, if you have a model, you can put that into it. Maybe I've seen some communities add a factor number of lead or galvanized service lines on that main to then add into their order of water main replacement or lining. So lots of different options here. You don't have to do them all. Pick and choose what's going to work for your utility. Next slide. So here is an example. We're working with the city of Hoboken. How much time do I have? Okay. So you can see here that the yellow and orange are unknown. So the plan here for Hoboken is both replacement, where they're going to go, and also identification, because you can see here there's a lot more unknown than there are known lead. So next slide. So in order to do the prioritization, we broke everything down into census blocks. So you can see here, you don't see the actual services, but this is percent of the population under the age of 18. We've set a weighted value. If it's over 75% of, the highest in the community, where are the kids? That got a weighted value of 1, and then 0 for below 75. And this is a work in progress. Next slide. Here you see the density of unknowns or lead service lines. Again, we use the 75 percentile to see where are the higher concentrations of those unknowns. And that's where you saw a lot of the yellow and the orange. Next slide. Then this one we looked at, okay, where are the water main and road resurfacing projects happening? And now Hoboken knows what their plan is between now and 2025, barring any water main breaks or emergency replacements that come between now and then, which of course is possible. But this is where they plan to go. So, we're working with Hoboken. Most likely this factor is going to go higher because they already know they're going here. So they want to push these so that these have a higher weight, since they know that this is definitely where they're focused on. Next slide. There were also a couple other factors I didn't show. They do have an environmental justice overburdened community, but the very few in the city of Hoboken. But here's where, now this is where everything gets totaled. And so you can see where there's a higher total, there's a darker color, and you can kind of get an idea of where you may want to focus your plan. Again, you don't want to hop around. If you go to the next slide, this is an example of something that you might show on your plan to DEP. Let's say in the next 2 years, you're going to focus in that area in the middle. I think that's near like Washington Street. And you're going to target about 800 unknowns and 500 lead service lines in that area. Now, Hoboken assumes 20% of those unknowns will be lead. So that's included in that 50. So that's kind of, and then they know that year 2, let's say that they're going to that southern part of the city to do a replacement. Now it's not the highest score on everything, but that's where they're going for their water main. That's where they know they're going. So they took as large of an area as they could with their current financing, and they have a plan there. Then they went to year 4. Now, you're not going to know everything. So it's okay to say, this is the start of our plan. This is going to be our guide. It's just a guide. It can change. So water main replacements and paving projects for 2026 to 2031, not yet determined. This is going to be used to help find areas to target for those future years. At the same time, the city's doing citywide customer surveys, and they have other outreach programs. So that's really going to blanket the whole city for identification. But this is an example. There's lots of different ways to do this, but this is a simple prioritization model that you can use for developing your plan. I think that's it. Yep.
Thank you, Sandy. That was very informative about prioritization and planning. That's great. So Sandy and I have worked together for a long time, as she has worked with many utilities in New Jersey, because both Newark and Trenton Waterworks have the unlucky may be fortunate now, experience of replacing many lead service lines in our area so far. If you could switch to the next slide, please. So we began our program with our officially with our first violation of the ALE in 2017. And since then, it did take us some while to get our inventory together and get all of basically the paperwork and the ordinances and the contracts and everything together. So we kind of officially put the first shovel in the ground in early 2020, right before the pandemic hit. And since then, we've done phases 1 and 2, which amounts to $50 million in contracts. We've used each phase had 3 contracts with a management firm overseeing those contracts. As Kareem mentioned, we currently have a $1,000 voluntary program. People don't know this, but that's how Newark started. We modeled ourselves after Newark. When they switched program to free and mandatory, they had a lot of benefits. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But so that is our plan. I say we average $5,500 per replacement. That's because 75 or 80% of our replacements only involve one side of the service line. It's only one side that contains lead. It's usually the utility side. And then we do plan to continue on as we're required to. We have about 20,000 more to go. We've done 9,500 to date. So we're clipping along. Next slide, please. So if there is a best practice, the number one best practice is create a mandatory and free program. And there are many reasons for that. But Newark and Passaic Valley have done ordinances and are starting these programs or have finished these programs successfully. I'll say mandatory is obvious because you just need to get it done. But the free is so important. Even for areas where people have more money and can, more disposable income and can afford this, you need the free to get your foot in the door, because you're going to spend so much effort trying to get inside to look at the material at the meter. As soon as people hear that there might be a cost, they close the door. You need it to be free and mandatory also because of if you have a high tenant population, if you need permission, you need to write an ordinance that gives you permission to go inside to check the material and do the replacement work as needed. If you have to track down out-of-state landlords, it's not going to happen. You're going to spend so much effort going from one house here, one house over there, one house over there, that you're just going to blow your entire budget just trying to figure out what materials and doing these projects, these little mini projects ad hoc. In addition, you will make enemies of every public works department that you're working with or DOT that you're working with, because they want to know when you're going to be done with that street so they can pave it, or they can schedule their paving projects around you, or they can work with you, or you can work with them. If you're just going from place to place, you're just going to anger everybody. So I highly recommend mandatory and free program. Even before you get started with the replacements, you should know that you're going to have to dedicate staff to this effort. I recommend a special phone number and an email address that is manned all the time. People can answer the next day. I mean, you really should answer within 48 hours of an email or a phone message that comes in. I'm answering calls all day long. I have another staff member that's answering phone calls all day long. It's really important to have that communication. And same with once you get going with the construction project, holy smokes, the number of markouts we had to do to keep up with our contractors. At one point, we were doing 500 replacements a month, and the contractors wanted us to mark out more than just their replacement list, so that if they got a homeowner to sign up while they were out there, they could just do the work. So I had people working lots of overtime and weekends to keep up with the markout schedule. So just be aware of that. And same with field support. These contractors are experienced, but they do come up with issues that they need someone from the utility to actually guide them on and provide, support. So just make sure you have people dedicated for that. And they really need to understand the lead program, especially when you're working on private side replacements. It's a totally different ball of wax than our normal construction projects. So they really need to understand how the lead program works, because it is different. Permitting with the different, even our own town, City of Trenton, but certainly with other municipalities. If you're coming at them with 500 road opening permits a month, 500 plumbing permits, well, it ends up being less than that because only a portion are homeowner side, but this completely overwhelms their departments. So set up expectations from the beginning. How do they want to handle it? Can they do inspections with just photographs? Do they need to hire other people to help? Like it became a major issue that we had to figure out how to solve very quickly. As was mentioned earlier about road moratoriums, the DOT has not given us any good feedback about waiver of road moratoriums. And other than the people that have volunteered to sign up for the program, road moratoriums and paving schedules has been the #1 driver of our program, where we've been doing replacement works or not doing replacement works. We have people that have signed contracts and are ready to go, and they're on a street under moratorium, and we've told them we cannot do their work now. We'll have to come back because the restoration on moratorium streets is so cost prohibitive that we would lose out on doing 10 other replacements if we had for each address on a moratorium street that we have to fully restore. Mike mentioned earlier about collecting photos of the pipe material by the meter. I highly recommend that. We came up with that during the shutdown, and it's become very effective. On the right of my slide, you can see 2 cases where people submitted photos, and I showed these cases because they actually look like something else. So the photo on the left, if you see where it's not scratched, that's kind of a grayish material. So I would have said, oh, that was possibly galvanized steel. But if they scratched it, you can see that the copper material is showing through. And same on the right, that was kind of a greenish color, like the way copper oxidizes, and you scratched it and it's gray underneath. So pipes can be painted. They can be discolored because of dirt or just oxidation. So you do need to give information to the homeowners about they need to scratch the pipe near where it goes into the wall to the outside. Also, we get them by email, and I look at them personally, and I will send an email back saying, please retake a picture with better lighting. Oh, wait, whoops, that's your gas line. Please take a picture of the water meter and the pipe between the water meter and the wall. So that's been a very effective way to collect information. As I said earlier, galvanized steel is lead pipe. That's just, it's a definition by DEP. That's what we got to use. And as Mike mentioned earlier, with your inventory is constantly changing. And so if we're ever going to get to the point where predictive modeling can be used, or other ways of talking about what material is there without having to actually dig up the entire line and look at it, you have to know where your source of information comes from, and you have to know how it changes over time. There are some cases where we have done a replacement and we didn't have that tracked. So our service card says the material is galvanized, but we dig it up and it actually turns out to be plastic or copper. So we need both of those pieces of information for future predicting. There are times when a homeowner calls in and says, I have copper or I have galvanized, and they turn out to be wrong. So we just need to know where that information is coming from and then how it changes over time so that we can figure out what are the most reliable sources of information. Or if we have 2 or 3 sources of information that all say the same thing, maybe that's more reliable. And I can't stress this enough, you got to communicate in a positive, truthful way. So right now we are done with phase 2. We are out of funding for any future phases. We're going to get funding, but we're in a pause period. So we have to be positive about that with homeowners. I say your address is automatically placed in the lead service line replacement program for a future phase. We are currently seeking funding to continue replacement. So you just talk about it, you spin it in a positive way, but be fully truthful as well, because people will call you out on things all the time, either in, you know, an in-person presentation or an email that I wrote 2 years ago or whatever. Just be as truthful as you can about current circumstances and transparent. It's important to be transparent, and most people accept that this is a very complicated, very long-term, very big job, and that it takes time and effort to get through it. So most people are appreciative of that. I believe that's the end of my presentation. Thank you, everybody. And I believe we're moving to question and answer sessions next. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Kristen. That was excellent. What we're gonna do, we're gonna go right, we're not gonna go right into questions and answers right away. I just want to remind everybody, if you're gonna do a question, please type it in the Q&A section, not into the chat, because we want to keep a record of all the questions and answers. We're going to try to get to them as best we can. So if you do have questions, please do put those in the Q&A. And once again, thank you, Kristen, for an excellent presentation. These are great experts we have on the webinar today. They are going to be a resource during the Q&A, and then even beyond that, you can get in touch with them by email or by phone to help you answer some of your questions as you move along with your own program. All right, so we're going to move on to the section on financing lead service line replacements. This is, I think, is a pretty important subject. The work group has been talking about this for quite a bit of time on how you gonna find the money to get these programs off the ground and started. And we're really pretty honored to have with us today David Zimmer, Executive Director of the New Jersey Infrastructure Bank, who has a lot of information on financing, and hopefully we can get some answers to where to find the money. And with that, I'll turn it over to David. It's all yours.
Thank you, Michael. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
All right. I'm going to try and share my screen here. Just let me know when it comes up. Can you see that?
We can see it.
Okay, great. So thank you, everybody. You know, we've got
Dave, just if you put into, just click on
slideshow. How's that?
slideshow, and then there you go. That's perfect. It's all yours, Dave.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to provide some highlights on to how to go about accessing the financing that's available through the Water Bank program. And the New Jersey Water Bank, for those of you that are unaware, is a joint program administered by both the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection and the New Jersey I-Bank. We've been around for 35 years. We've issued close to $9.25 billion worth of loans in those 3 decades. We estimate that we've saved ratepayers with principal forgiveness and low interest cost loans almost $3 billion in financing. So it's a great program, and hopefully you guys will walk away with some decent information with respect to how to finance lead service lines. You know, you've heard from both Kareem and Kristen. We've got lead service line replacement project financing out with both Newark and Trenton, and some pretty decent size. I've split the presentation up into 3 different sections that really kind of mimic the way our program is set up. There is a technical review process, an application in a technical review process that everybody goes through. DEP handles most, if not all, of those reviews. Then there is the loan financing portion that is handled almost exclusively by I-Bank personnel. And then at the very, very end, and I'm going to try to spend the most time on this, is what's available. You know, what kind of cash is the state making in terms of principal forgiveness, and really who's prioritized in those rankings. So the very first thing that you do is you have to apply. You have to let us know that you have a project and you want financing. And we have an online portal called H2 Loans. It's www.h2loans.com. Very, very straightforward. We have a woman that is dedicated almost exclusively to help potential borrowers and applicants get through that process. once you give us your information, and we only need really just the very, very initial bits and pieces, project description, estimated project cost amount, et cetera. You're going to do that in H2 loans, and you can request an application meeting at any time during the application. And the DEP, staff from the DEP, the environmental group, the engineering review group, folks from the iBank, we join you on that line. We let you know which of our personnel will be responsible for the certain sectors of reviews, who your contact information is, et cetera. So we try to make it an incredibly user-friendly process. Just very quickly, because anybody that's interested, you can call us and we can go and do it in detail, but your project will go through an environmental review, which includes cultural resource review. And the objective there is to get an environmental decision doc. That is where the DEP writes a document that says, we've done our review. Here's the results of that review. We're going to turn things over now to our engineering group. You are most of the time coordinating simultaneously with the DEP's engineering team, but you certainly can't get final specs approved by the engineering team until you get your EDD. But there's something to consider when you're going through all of this. So, and I'll get into this in just a couple of minutes, but the program is split up into both a short-term construction loan and then long-term financing once the project's done, and we know to the penny how much your project costs. So short-term loans finance soft costs, engineering and soft costs such as your legal costs, your bond counsel costs, as well as any kind of environmental review expenses that you would have, and your engineering, planning, and design. So when you come in, most people right now actually get a loan. As soon as they come in, they hand us their engineering contract. The DEP looks at it, and within 24 hours, the DEP can turn around and say, we'll certify that contract, right? The information that you've given us is legitimate. The dollar cost amount, the way that you procure that engineering contractor, if it's an external consulting engineer as opposed to your own engineer, right? We'll go through all of that, and you can turn around and close your short-term loan for the entirety estimated cost of your project. Now, you don't have access to those funds. You only have access to that portion of your project that has been certified by the DEP. In this case, the engineering contract. But at least you've got cash flow coming in from the program, from the iBank, to pay your engineers, to pay your environmental consultants, to pay your lawyers as you're moving along to construction. So particularly for folks, communities that have a little bit of a cash crunch, the fact that we provide a loan right up front is very, very helpful. The next thing that you do right before you go out to authorization to advertise is you check in with the SED group, the small and economically disadvantaged review group. And they're going to tell you there are certain cross cutters, there are goals that you need to meet with respect to small and economically disadvantaged firms, right? They want to make sure that in your bid documents, your contractors are making this project available to that community. You get approval to go out to authorization to advertise. 30, 45 days later, your bids come in, you put it in front of the DEP. More often than not, it's responsible low-cost bid wins, right? But again, that's all part of the process. That is, in a nutshell, in very, very quick terms, the application and technical review process. Now, once you get down to certification, you've got your authorization to award, and shortly thereafter, the DEP certifies the construction of that project. And your project may have multiple contracts, like in lead service lines, right? We've got 2 different projects with Trenton. We had 10 different phases with Newark. So oftentimes it makes sense, as you've heard by a number of the folks that talked before me, about splitting the projects up, but keeping them geographically concentrated for efficiency. And from a financing perspective, it actually makes sense to do that. And when we get into the funds that are available from the BIL, the IIJA, I'll explain a little bit more why you might want to split your community's effort into multiple phases and multiple contracts. So we're going to give you a short-term loan to help you pay for your engineering costs, your legal fees, your environmental costs, and your construction. But again, when you're going to do a lead service line and you're getting a loan for construction, right? You need to let the program know whether you're going to impose a special assessment on the borrowers or not. You've heard a lot of folks talk to me or talk to you right before me about the need, you know, Kristen was talking about it, the need to make it free, right? So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that that's a great idea or that is a bad idea. I'll let the folks that have the hands-on experience explain that to you, but there are tax consequences. There are document issues if you are going to do a special assessment on your borrowers or not. The way that we set up your loan is determined by whether or not you are going to impose special assessments on your homeowners. So just keep that in mind, right? You heard Kareem talk about, they set up an incredible program, interactive online applications, et cetera. You're going to want to elicit your owners, your homeowners, or I should say, you know, in a lot of cases, the renters' consent and waivers. Now, that doesn't have any impact on our financing program, but it may actually delay certain processes that you're working on with us if you're not proactive about getting those consents and waivers. So again, not part of our program, but something you certainly want to think about. You know, as Kaveen said, if I can summarize it, it's communication, communication, communication. You can't have enough of it on this type of project. So you get a planning and design loan from the program. The statute, so the state gives us the authority to do certain things. We have the authority to make a planning and design loan to cover your engineering expenses for 2 calendar years. Right now, let's say that you start the process and you've been going at it for a little bit of time, and then you come into the program. Let's say that you've got, before you came in, you have 6 months worth of expenses, and then you get a planning and design loan. You can actually look back a couple of years in the DEP. If they determine that those costs are related to the project, we will include those as part of the total project cost. I'll leave it at this. If you've got those kind of expenses, have the application call with us, discuss those costs, and we'll let you know which ones will actually apply. But don't think that you're limited to the moment that you come in the door. All right, we do look backs on planning and design loans. So you get 2 calendar years to get to a construction certification. And from the point of your first construction certification, you have, by statute again, 3 full fiscal years. So sometimes we've got some very, very large projects. We got a couple of projects right now. It's at the end of the fiscal year. People aren't closing their loans right now. They're actually waiting for another 2 weeks, and they'll close their loan with us first week of July, so that they get that entire year under the construction loan, and then 3 years on top of that. But again, you're going to come into us, and we're going to work with you to try and optimize not just your sources of funds, but also the timing. So again, 2 years and 3 full fiscal years on your construction loan. If you don't complete construction within those 3 full fiscal years, we do have the ability to roll your remaining expenses for another 3 years upon certification by the DEP that you actually need up to another 3 full years. So what we do is we give you a loan for the amount of money that you've requisitioned and spent to date, and then we basically give you another short-term loan for as long as another 3 full fiscal years. A couple of things that your bond counsel, you know, you're going to be working, your bond counsel is going to be working very closely with the program's bond counsel from McCarter and English. They're going to fill out a short-term financial addendum form. We're going to put you through credit approval. Bottom line, if you have an investment grade rating from any one of the 3 major rating houses, Fitch, Moody's, or S&P, you have approval to come into our program. If you don't have that, there are a couple of workarounds. I would invite you to call me personally, and I can walk you through how we could consider getting you into the program, okay? And then, of course, you've got to go through the public notice, adopt your ordinances and resolutions, and that's it. That's how you get a short-term loan to finance your project. Once your project is construction complete, to the penny, we will long-term finance you, okay? Your bond counsel is going to get in front of us again, fill out the long-term financial addendum form. We will review your short-term credit approval that we gave 3 years earlier, just to make sure that things haven't changed. If things have changed, you know, and let's say that your credit rating is dropped below investment grade, we will still make you a loan, so you don't have to worry about, you know, you got downgraded and you've got a $10 million loan with the program. But there's certain steps that we go through and paper the file. Again, that's a very unique situation, and we would be working with you one-on-one. Your maturity terms, your engineer dictates the useful life, okay? So we have a statutory maximum of 30 years. So let's say, for example, you're putting pipes in and your engineer is telling you it's a 50-year term. I can't lend past 30 years. If your useful life, like on a pump station, might be 15 years, I can only lend out to 15 years. I can't give you a 30-year loan. So again, that's dictated by your engineer. And then finally, you just have to get us your final requisition, and we convert your short-term loan into a long-term loan when we do our long-term bond deals. Most borrowers opt to roll their accrued interest, if any, that they've accrued during the short-term loan period. And by the way, our short-term loan rate right now, 0.35%. Anybody that's gone out and done a one-year band in the last 2 weeks has done a one-year band north of 2%, right? And our short-term construction loan program charges right now around 0.35%. So it's an incredibly cheap construction loan program. We only charge on the amount of funds that you've drawn. On bands, you're gonna start accruing interest on day one for the entirety of the band, whether or not you've used those funds, okay? And then they also, most borrowers opt to roll their fees in the long-term loan as well. So they're all financed at what is effectively, you know, typically less than 50% of a AAA rate. I don't know that I've ever explained the program in 10 minutes or less, but that's the program. And again, if you have any questions, just contact the program. You know, if I or my staff can't answer it and it's a finance question, let's put it this way, there isn't a finance question that my staff or I cannot answer with respect to project issues. We'll make sure that we get you in touch with the right folks at the DEP to answer your technical questions. Now, let's talk about the cash that's coming into the state from the BIL, from the IIJA, right? Commissioner Sean LaTourette and his team, I think they did an unbelievable job in a very, very short time at the beginning of this year, really setting up the intended use plan and laying out in very clear terms the affordability criteria for the program for both the clean water and the drinking water SRF, and also laying out the ranking methodology and determining who would get what. So the highest ranked credits projects, and Elena went over this a little bit earlier, right? We look at affordability criteria. There used to be disadvantaged communities on the drinking water side. The DEP took that and folded that into one constant definition between the two programs. It's affordability criteria. And each town gets a project affordability score, a PAS, which is you take your MHI and you divide it by the state's MHI. And then instead of putting that in a ratio, just multiply it by 100 to get a %. If it's 80 or less, you qualify under affordability criteria. If it's just over 80, there are two additional factors that the DEP is including in its score. So if the unemployment rate of the community is greater than the state's unemployment rate, you get 1 credit. If the project population trend, what's your growth rate? If that is less than the state's growth rate, you also get 1%. And your PAS is your MHI factor minus the 1 point that you may or may not have gotten from the state unemployment rate and the 1 point that you may or may not have gotten from your growth rate. So as long as that number comes in at 80 or lower, you meet the affordability criteria. Now, there's a little bit of a asterisk, right? Towns that don't meet the criteria, and I'll throw my town out there. I live in Princeton, New Jersey, right? You would not think that Princeton meets the affordability criteria, but there are areas in Princeton that have a very high immigrant population. So if the service area in these parts of your town can meet the PAS, if the project is going to be done specifically in that sector of your community can meet the affordability criteria. And I'm going to say you want to talk to the DEP and the DEP alone on this. Do not come to the iBank. This is not our purview. We've not been involved in this, but the DEP will absolutely be able to assist you in determining whether or not your town or a particular sector of your town qualifies for affordability criteria. Now, let's say that you get close. You are an EJ community, but your score is not all in, your PAS is not less than 80. Well, there is a second way that you can meet the affordability criteria for EJ, for economic environmental justice communities. And that's if you have at least 35% of the service area. So again, not necessarily your whole town, but the project service area population is defined as low-income households. So how does the state define low-income households? And that's if a household has an income that is less than 2 times the US poverty rate, that house is a low-income household. And if you have more than 35% or more of that area, and you're going to do that project specifically in that area, that would be considered an EJ community, and the DEP gives that community 80 affordability points. Okay? So why is it important that you qualify under the affordability criteria? Well, generally speaking, the program on the drinking water side has set aside $5 million this year. There's a $1 million principal forgiveness cap per applicant. So on your drinking water project, you'll get the first $1 million in project costs. We got a lot of feedback from people that they didn't want to do principal forgiveness loans, they wanted grants. I would tell you from a federal level, managing a grant program is an awful lot of paperwork and would cause a lot of agita to the program. This is our response to basically creating a grant-like program. We just give you the first $1 million in project costs for free, right? The next $10 million, and this is really the kind of the advantage of having an affordability criteria above and beyond principal forgiveness that's available. You get 75% of your funds at 0%. The base program only offers 50% of the funds from the DEP at 0%. So there's an additional 25%. And right now, with rates at around 4%, right? That's 1% of your program every year on a 30-year program. That's going to add up to roughly 15%. So a very healthy savings for people that qualify under the affordability criteria, right? There is one caveat on the drinking water program alone. So this is not on the clean water side, but on the drinking water side, We are at a point right now where we still don't know how many projects we're going to get because we're at the very, very beginning of the IIJA, the BIL, cash coming in starting this coming year, right? So we are continuing to cap projects at $25 million per applicant. Now I'll say going into the end of this fiscal year, next April, May, or June, we may have enough cash and we may alleviate that cap. But for now, all projects, all water bank projects, drinking water projects are capped at $25 million. All right, so let's talk about lead service line replacement and cash that's going to be available. The department has set aside $50 million specifically for lead service lines. 25 of that is in principal forgiveness. There is a $5 million principal forgiveness cap per applicant per year. 5 million per applicant per year. So I'm going to go back to my comments about Trenton and Newark, right? And again, we had 10 phases, 10 different contracts. So what you might think about is if you have projects in your town and you know that that's going to cost you more than $25 million, or let's say even more than $10 million, right? What you need to do is you need to go out and contract separately each year. So don't think of the entire town as one big project. Break it up. Optimize your probability of getting that up to $5 million. Okay. So how do we break it down? First 10 million, half of it's principal forgiveness. And then the other half, you get 25% from the DEP and a 0% loan and 25% from the iBank at our AAA rate. Here's where the advantage of being an affordability criteria community or an EJ community. The next 10 million is at 75%, 0% from the DEP and 25% loan from the iBank at our AAA rate. And then the remaining $5 million is at a 50-50 at our base rate, 50% at 0%. Now, let's say that you have a project that's huge and you need to borrow more than $25 million in 1 year. We will lend you that through the iBank at 100% of our AAA rate, right? I'll put the caveat on there that we are constrained in terms of leveraging our portfolio at some point. We're not even close to that right now. So we have the capacity. So for people that have very large projects in any given year that would exceed 25%, we can still do one-stop shopping. Just understand that everything over $25 million is going to be at the AAA rate. There will not be any 0% loan funds. If you're not affordability, if you are not, you do not meet the affordability criteria, that $10 to $20 million where you're getting 75% of funds at 0%, that disappears. You get, from 10 to 25 at the base rate. Okay. All right. So you're interested. What do you need to do? You need to get your project into H2 loans. If you do not have an account set up already, so the iBank manages the portal on behalf of both the DEP and the iBank. So you just want to call us. There's a woman there, Mary Purcell. Anybody that's talked to her has loved her. She will take you in and smother you with attention and information. You want to call her at 609-219-8601. She will work with you to set up an account and set up your project manager. It must be employees of the town or the utility. So we do not allow accounts to be set up for towns by engineers, by bond counsel, et cetera. Once the town or the utility sets up the account, then the town or the utility has the ability to designate who they're setting up as their engineer. The engineer gets to go in and answer questions in a certain part of H2 loans that deals with the technical piece. You can set up an FA that can go in and manage information regarding finances, and you can set up your bond counsel and designate your bond counsel to manage the legal stuff. So that's it for me. Again, I don't know that I've ever whipped through our program in 15 or 20 minutes like that. I would imagine that there's a lot of questions. I'm happy to answer any. And again, to the extent that people have questions that they either can't ask here or can't get answered here, just call the iBank or the DEP. We'll make sure you're talking to the right folks. Back to you, Michael.
All right, thanks a lot, Dave. I appreciate that. We're gonna go to, I guess, Paul Brett. We have another code we have to put onto the screen. A second code, is that right, Paul?
That's right, Mike. Thank you. Andrea, would you be able to load that second code for us, please? Great, thank you. So this is the second code. Please write this code down. This is the second code you're going to need when we send out those training certification forms at the end of today. So please copy that code. And that'll be submitted with the information that we're going to need for the training contact hours. Leave that up for just a second, and then Mike, I'll hand it back to you.
All right, good, thanks, Paul. All right, so what we're gonna ask is, all the speakers, if you could put your, if they're still on the speakers, put your cameras on. We're gonna turn it over to Gary Brune, and he's gonna go through a list of questions that we received, and we're gonna try to get answers to those questions. So we're gonna call our speakers back. We're gonna introduce everybody to the speakers again, and we're gonna ask Gary to just kind of go through the questions. So Gary Brune, if you want to take over the questions and review the questions, and hopefully we get the answers.
Sure, thank you, Mike. I would point out that if fresh on the heels of David's presentation, we don't have any questions in the Q&A about the financial part of this yet, but I encourage people to put those in. I'm sure there's questions on your mind. For one of the other questions that came up, though, I'm going to pitch this to Elena, is that if a system has no lead service lines and has no galvanized lines, what, if anything, should it be submitting to the department, and how often? Meaning, for the purpose of the inventory, is it something annual? Is it a one-time certification that they have no lead service lines, or how does that work? So that's to Elena.
Thanks, Gary. So at this time, the statute requires all water systems to submit this information regardless of if you have lead service lines identified or not. Even if you have, if you've confirmed that all service lines are not lead, you're still required to submit this. That could change in the coming years, but for this year, those submissions are required for everyone.
By the way, if other panelists want to chime in, please do along the way here. Staying with Elena, another related question, Elena, is if the inventory limited to potable water lines, or does it also include things like fire service and irrigation, and things that are not necessarily for drinking water purposes, but may contain lead?
At this time, it's only required for potable sources. So no fire suppression lines, no irrigation, just for potable sources.
Okay. Sandra, one quick one for you. In your presentation, you mentioned high pressure areas as a criteria, and there was a question about why high pressure areas would necessarily be a criteria.
So for that particular utility, they've been getting a lot of breaks in that area. So they know that they plan to do some water main rehab in that area, in that specific area. So it's really a case by case basis. It's just specific to this one utility.
Okay. I'm not sure whether to pitch this to David or Elena. I'm going to start with Elena, but somebody asked if the system just has galvanized lines, so it doesn't have lead service lines, but it just has galvanized. Are they necessarily at a disadvantage for receiving state funding?
No. So galvanized lines, for the purposes of the law and for funding, as I understand it, are counted as the same thing. It's a lead service line regardless. The only disadvantage that you might be at is principal forgiveness funds are awarded if you have an ALE, which you probably would not have if you strictly have galvanized lines. So that might be, the only situation where that could be a detriment. But if you meet the affordability criteria, you could get principal forgiveness that way. I don't know if there's anything I missed, David. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Nope, you hit the nail on the head.
So Elena, staying with you, if there are galvanized water mains as opposed to service lines, do they require replacement and should they be in the inventory?
So the law only is instructing the replacement and identification of service lines. So mains are something separate. So for the purposes of this law and everything that's required under it, no. Just service lines.
Okay, moving it around over to Kristen for, I think you might be the right person for this, Kristen. If there's a water main under a state highway, because I know we've had a lot of discussions about road moratoriums. What do you do if you have I should say a lead service line under a state highway? What's the process?
You have to replace it if it's a lead service line.
I guess
So
they're
you gotta-
asking about DOT and.
Yeah, so you gotta do your road opening permit with the DOT and follow their rules. If you have to hire police, if you have to shut down the road, then that's what you gotta do. It's treated the same way as any other lead service line. The only exception is if it's under moratorium, and then you might wanna push it to a later phase, or later time period so that you can get out of that moratorium time. I'll tell you though, I talked about moratoriums earlier. Departments of Public Works do not like to hear that the minute their moratorium ends, you're gonna come back and poke a whole bunch of holes in their street. That makes them very upset as well. So as much as you can get out ahead of paving schedules, do it.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. Elena, back to you about sequential sampling. And the question here was, from the DEP's perspective, the minimum number of liters that would be required, and they used examples of 5 liters or 10 liters, before a sequential sampling type of approach would be considered acceptable. And I'm not sure that that's, well, I'll pitch it to you, Elena. I'm not sure the department's requiring sequential sampling, but go ahead.
Yes, that is not a requirement at this time. I am not an expert on sequential sampling, so I would suggest maybe sending me or the water supply box an email and I can get you an answer to that. But I don't know what the best advice is that right now.
Sandy, can you answer that question? Is it possible?
No, I didn't. But I think, Elena, I think the question is really asking about, if we're going to use water quality, if that's an approved method to identify lead service lines, what's the threshold? When can you say this is not a lead service line?
I don't think we don't have any guidance out on that at this time. So I can reach out and bring that up and see if we can get an answer on that.
Yeah, the studies that have been out there have said, it can be good to identify a lead service line, but as far as eliminating the possibility that it's a lead service line is tougher to do with confidence.
So Elena, on the issue of extensions, yet another question about for DP. The law talks about, and I think you mentioned in your presentation, that there's extensions are possible for, if necessary, to meet service reliability demand or public health need. But there's a separate mention having to do with fiscal distress. And the question basically is, if a water utility checks all of those boxes, so all the things I just mentioned, is it, and they talk about going from 10 to 15 years, is it beyond 15 years? If you check all those boxes, you can get an extension, or is the extension limited to from 10 to 15?
The extension only allows for up to 5 additional years. So we can give you 1 year, 2 years, all the way up to 5 years. You would have to meet one of those requirements. You don't have to meet all 3. I think we're still internally working on what exactly will be more fleshed out criteria of what would be qualifying for an extension. So we're hoping to release that soon, but like I said, we won't be granting any extensions for the next year. So we'll have to wait and see how people's programs go before allowing those.
Okay. David, just a quick chance to give you a chance to point out something. You mentioned 0.35% is the rate on short-term loans, right? Currently. Correct. And how does, just a thought, maybe you could tell folks how that compares to the current municipal rates.
Right. So again, the municipal rates are going to be, the ban rates are going to be fairly similar to where the 1-year treasury rate is. That's a, fairly decent indicator. And I would tell you right now, 1-year treasuries looking at, let's see, 1-year treasuries are 280. So, let's say that you had a AAA rating, you were able to get a ban off at an incredible rate, 2.5% for a 1-year rate. Now granted, ours is a monthly rate, but I think in the last 6 months, as rates have jumped over 250 basis points, right? Our short-term rate has gone from 28 basis points to 35. Right, so we're more than 2% cheaper. And again, it's only on funds drawn as opposed to your total ban if you were to go this via the ban route.
Okay, thank you. Kareem, there was a question about the model ordinance in Newark and if that could be found online somewhere.
Yes, yes, you can find it on our website, leadserviceline.com. It's at the bottom of the page.
Okay, thank you. Went back to David on this one. When funds are awarded, David, is the utility responsible for paying contractors, or does DEP reimburse the utility? Or does DEP directly pay the contractor?
No, so the way that it works is we have privity with our borrower. So, and this is all online, and I'll go through this very, very quickly, but what happens is contractors and vendors submit their invoices to the utility or the town. Somebody at the town, typically the CFO or the administrator, goes through those invoices, puts them into H2 loans. So it's all electronic, uploads the electronic copies of the invoices, hits a button, sends them to us. DEP reviews it. We review it simultaneously. We wire the money back to the town or the utility. The town or the utility is responsible for paying the vendor. I will tell you, pre-COVID, and I'm the person that is the last signatory on the funds going out. So I see this and I actually check it. Our average was 21 to 28 days. I rarely get a requisition that I pay that has been in the system for more than 14 days. I think I paid one yesterday that was in the system for 3 days. So again, like COVID really forced us to become a lot more efficient and use the internet. The requisition program that the DEP and the iBank have set up for towns, we can get your cash to you to pay your vendors very, very quickly so that you do not have to tap lines of credit, bank lines, endure fees for that, et cetera.
And Gary, I just want to echo what Dave said, right? I'm a firsthand example and experience of how that reimbursement comes back to a city like Newark on a timely manner, efficient and effective way from DEP and the iBank's office. So yes, he's right. It's a quick turnaround.
Thanks, Kareem.
We had a question, Elena, which may have been answered, but it had to do with the inlet issue. And it said that the previous webinar that was told that the inlet would be defined. And just looking for more, I think, definition around how DEP is defining the inlet and where the requirement ends to replace the lead service line.
So based on what we've heard from other water systems and what they've done, we are recommending that water systems replace the lead service line material up to the first meter, the shutoff valve, or 3 feet of pipe within the home, whichever is sooner. We're putting out a updated frequently asked questions document, hopefully by the end of the week, and that will be included in there. But that's our recommendation.
Okay. Matt, not sure if you can, if you're familiar with this, but the question from Kevin Garrettson is, if the water main is ductile iron and there are copper services, what is the acceptable lead percentage for the core and the curb stops? I think he mentions that 0.25% was one factor that was picked up from some of the manufacturers. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that issue, Matt.
Yeah, I've asked that question myself. I'm going to yield to DEP on that one, Gary.
Okay.
That's a tough answer. That's a tough question to answer.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd be able to answer that off the cuff. So I'll have to follow up on that question.
Sorry, Elena, that wasn't very nice.
No, no problem.
Okay, we stumped the stars there.
We'll keep a record of that one, and we'll try to get as much clarity out with the presentation as possible. And just so everyone's aware, everything that we can't really get to, these are great ideas for the next steps for the work group. So we are taking everything into consideration.
So Deandra, I should ask you, in the interest of time, we're getting down near the back stretch of the questions we have. Do you want to press for one or two more, or what's your pleasure?
Yes, you could do 2 more.
All right. So if there's cast iron mains, let me see, who would I guess I'm going to stay with Elaine on this one. Cast iron, if you have a cast iron main with lead joints, must those be replaced?
If I'm not as familiar with mains, I guess the joints are connecting the main to the main. If that's the case, no, the law is not requiring that. The law is specifically for service lines only. If the joint is connecting to a service line, I would say yes, that has to be replaced.
Okay. Well, maybe I guess a last question. The law allows for partial replacements as part of regular water main work. I think this was put in there in case of where despite repeated attempts, the homeowner couldn't be contacted. Is DEP planning to put out any kind of criteria governing those partial replacements or to track those partial replacements as they're done?
It would have to be tracked on the inventory spreadsheet. I think there's a column that says if this is a partial replacement or not. Partial replacements are only allowed under the law if there is like a water emergency, such as a water main break, or if there's a water main replacement happening. And like you said, you can't get the customer to cooperate at that time. Those are the only 2 instances that's an option for partial replacements to be done. We have some information on our guidance in that. I'm not sure if we'll be putting anything else out on that. I would just say that's something that needs to be tracked in the inventory spreadsheet and followed up on if you can coordinate with the property owner to have that eventually replaced. There are, I don't know them off the top of my head, but under, I believe, the regular lead and copper rule, there are requirements for sampling that need to be done. If you are doing a partial lead service line replacement, there's notification requirements too, I believe. So just be aware of those. If you do end up having to conduct a partial, there are requirements under the LCR that you'll have to follow.
Okay, thank you, Elena. So
Can I add a quick thing to that?
Please.
One thing that trips a lot of utilities up about partials are what I call planned partials is the 45 days notice before you're going to do the planned partial. You have to notify them. I believe you have to give them the opportunity to have it replaced. But don't quote me on that, but you do have to give them 45 days notice, and you have to document that you gave them the 45 days notice.
Thank you, Kristen. So I think one last question. In this case, the example is if the meter is at the curb at the meter pit with a series of long services to a series of apartment buildings, how is that type of situation addressed when you're replacing lead service lines?
Kareem, would you be able to answer that?
We just replaced the lead service lines into the property. The answer, she said, but the 3 feet, the meter, whatever it is, with a utility, we just replaced the lead service line into the property.
All right,
3 feet up to the meter, wherever it's at.
thanks.
So I think I'm going to kick it back to Rich and Mike because I think we've exhausted most of our questions.
No, thanks a lot, Gary.
Yep.
We're gonna go to, first of all, I want to thank New Jersey Water Association for helping us put this together. They were a big help. I also want to thank not only the speakers that were today, dedicated their time to speak today, but the entire work group that's been working for about 6 months on this. And we're going to be doing some more work, and this is all part of a lead in drinking water task force that's ran by Jersey Water Works. And everyone's done an excellent job. There's a lot of information that's available on Jersey Waterworks website. That's all these information that we've gathered over the last 6 months, and all that's going to be available. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deandra or Rich to kind of wrap it up.
I'll jump in. Just thank you, everyone, our panelists, our partners, New Jersey Water, for partnering with us. We really appreciate having David Zimmer here and Alina. We really appreciate having sort of a wholesome conversation where we can get all perspectives. Thank you, everyone, for staying with us. We still have a lot of people on. We hope we were able to get you a little bit closer to getting the show on the road, and we will try to get some feedback and clarity on some of the questions that we weren't able to respond to. And if you have any sort of ideas on things that you would like the implementation work group to look into, any issues that you're experiencing on your end that we haven't quite covered yet, you can email me. My information is on the screen, and I have connections with all of our presenters and can filter information out to them in case you need their expertise. So thank you so much for your time. And look out for a follow-up with the information from all presenters by end of week. Thank you, everyone. Rich, do you want to close us out?
All right, can't say anything more. Great presentation. The flow from start to finish was true perfection. You know, everybody enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and please reach out to us with any questions or comments.
Thanks, all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.